Let's start off this episode with a quote from Carl Jung, and it says, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." So here's a question. When was the last time you actually stopped to reflect? Not scrolling, not switching tasks, not moving on to the next thing, but genuinely stopped and asked yourself, how am I actually doing right now? Most of us don't. We struggle to do that. And it's not because we don't care. It's because nobody ever taught us how. Or we tried it once. You know, you stared at a blank journal page and thought, I don't even know what to say or where to start.
But here's what the science tells us. That pause, even 2 minutes of it, is one of the most powerful things your brain can experience. And it doesn't require a journal. It doesn't require a meditation cushion. You can speak it out loud to yourself in your car. You can say it in your voice memo. You can just sit quietly for 2 minutes and think about it in your head. Today, we're getting into why reflection can feel so unnatural in the first place, because that's the real question. And then we are getting into the neuroscience behind why it works, why speaking your thoughts out loud hits differently than just thinking them, and why most people are skipping the one step that converts experience into actual growth. Welcome to the Mental Fitness Podcast in partnership with NUE, that's NUE, where we explore real tools and stories for building mental strength in the modern world.
So what is reflection? That's what we're going to talk about first. It's a concept of many things. You know, it's a big part of journaling and meditation and therapy, but it's not those things in themselves, right? It's a key part of those things.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about daily reflection, and when you say it's not journaling and not meditation, but those things can be a form of reflection, but it's not just that. What it really is, it's an intentional pause between an experience and meaning. That's it.
Right. And that the word reflection itself comes from the Latin word reflector, which means to bend back. So you're literally turning attention back on yourself.
Yeah, and I think important is that it's not really how you reflect does not necessarily need to be super structured. It could be spoken out loud. It could be a voice memo on your phone, or it could be 2 minutes of sitting quiet or writing. For some, reflective journaling is the best way to do it. But all of that counts. There's not a set way to do it.
Yeah. And we've talked about connection to self. You know, it's a foundational pillar of mental fitness, right? And reflection is a key part of self-awareness, right? Is creating this space to kind of pause and literally reflect.
I think it's an important point. It's interesting. Experience alone doesn't teach you anything. Mm-hmm. Just going through experiences doesn't teach you anything. We all go through experiences. What teaches us is when we grow from those experiences. And the only way to grow is to learn from those experiences, which happens when we take time to reflect. We pause. If we're just running from experience to experience to experience to experience, we're in some ways, from an experiential standpoint, we're kind of redlining ourselves, but we're not pausing to benefit from those experiences.
Yeah, so there's obviously massive benefits, and we'll get into the science in just a second. But why, if there's benefits to this, if it helps us grow and evolve, why isn't everyone doing this, Dave? Like, why isn't everyone just in the habit of this?
There's a lot of reasons. I mean, I think in Western culture, we're really action-oriented by design. So action is valued, doing is valued, and it's almost looked down upon if we're just spending too much time sitting and thinking. And that idea is really explored really well in the book Slow Productivity, where it talks about some of the downside of our modern work culture, where we don't value deep thought and deep work, where a lot of deep thought doesn't appear to be productive.
Yeah, no, that's true. Productivity, you can tie a metric to. Action, you can tie a metric to, right? But an output, or introspection is hard to have an output or a metric. So that it's easy for the Western world to see that as wasted time, just sitting and reflecting, right? But it's not a universal thing. Other cultures actually do this really well. In Japan, and hopefully I'm not saying this wrong, they call it Hansei. And Hansei. It's a formal daily self-reflection practice that's embodied in their schools, their workplaces, sports teams. It's not optional. Like, it's a structural part of their society.
Yeah, that's interesting. Indigenous cultures, they have talking circles or communal reflection. There's traditions where there's deliberate processing of experience. And the West didn't discover reflection and discard it. We really inherited it. We really inherited a work ethic that kind of crowded out reflection. And Western society has been the primary driver of economic growth the last 100 years in the world and the Industrial Revolution. But through that, there was some cultural elements lost that take its toll on us individually.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it's not just like a new wellness trend. This is an ancient human practice that, like you said, the modern Western life quietly discarded or eliminated.
Yeah. But, reflection got co-opted by the wellness industrial complex. So
yeah, the commercialization of everything, right?
Yeah. Influencer morning routines. And that branding kind of made it easy to dismiss if it looks performative and it doesn't feel real.
Right. Yeah, I think mindfulness in itself as a word, it's just thrown around so much in the influencer cultures and this wellness culture that's big right now, that it's easy for a huge portion of the audience that needs it most to kind of be turned off by that word in itself.
Yeah, just go back to the quote where we started the episode. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. I just think until you really know yourself, until you understand why you're doing the things you're doing or how you're responding to certain experiences, what your internal thoughts are, until you really know yourself, you're not living fully intentional. I mean, your experiences are shaping you, but not in a way that you're directing.
Right. Well, and I think the modern world has just, modern society, technology has made this so much harder to do, where we essentially have this attention economy. You have this, high-powered computer in your hand at all times. So, having a constant stimulation and dopamine hits makes it really hard to do nothing and just sit still. And boredom it's so hard to be bored today, which is a key part of just sitting still and reflecting.
And that's a big one for me. My favorite thing, and my kids probably got tired of hearing it, but my favorite thing as a dad is when my kids would say, "I'm bored." And I'd say, "That's awesome. Being bored is good." That's where, and then I give them my lecture. That's where creativity comes from. That's where you learn and grow. That's where you come to understand yourself. And I think that one of the biggest disservices we do our kids as parents is just trying to constantly entertain them. We put on the TV, or we put a screen in front of their face, or we sign them up for so many activities that they don't have any downtime. And I mean, I think it's good for kids to be engaged in things, and we have our kids involved in sports and music, and so we have a busy household. It's not that we don't have stuff going on, but I think it's important for kids to have downtime, for all of us actually to have downtime, but particularly for kids in that developmental phase. Boredom is viewed in our modern society as such a bad thing. And like you just said, Luke, the smartphone in our hand is we become so lazy that as soon as we feel bored, we just throw the screen in front of our face and do anything, scrolling mindless, endless stuff just to get rid of that feeling of boredom. But there's real growth in boredom. There's real growth. Those summer days when I was a kid sitting around when all my friends were busy doing other things and whatever activities I was involved in weren't happening at that moment, and I was just like laying on the grass in my yard with nothing to do, that's when I had like my deepest thoughts. That's such an important thing to bring back into our lives, is periods of boredom.
That's true. And I was thinking about this in preparation for this episode. I think a lot of people long for what you're saying, the good old days, right? When you're a kid, a lot less stimulation. You're trying to get creative. You're outside playing and daydreaming and imagining. Like, you can have the good old days again, and that feeling in something like reflection, right? You can get that feeling back of like being connected to yourself by being bored intentionally.
Right. I like to listen to a lot of audiobooks in particular. I listen to podcasts, but I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and I've always tried to be one that uses my time effectively. And what I've discovered a number of years ago, because when I'm driving in the car, there's almost always an audiobook on if I'm driving by myself. And then it was even when I'm riding my bike or going running, I have earbuds in and I'm listening to some book or something. I still do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what I've found is recognizing, hey, I don't need to constantly be filling myself with stuff all the time, even if it's good, useful, productive information. And now one of my favorite things is to just go on a run with nothing.
Yeah.
Or go on a long bike ride with nothing. And I discovered that when I started swimming, because when I first started swimming, I actually bought underwater headphones, waterproof headphones, and a waterproof case for my phone so that I could be listening to stuff while swimming. And it didn't work very well, and the sound wasn't very good. And so I finally gave it up. But what I discovered was my favorite time was the hour when I was swimming, because I couldn't put anything in my ears, and it was just me and my thoughts. And discovering that with swimming, I kind of expanded that to other forms of exercise. And there's still sometimes, if I'm going on a long bike ride, I usually put an audiobook in. Nothing wrong with that. But it's important whether it's your drive or your workouts or whatever, to just take some time to not have anything, no inputs, just allowing your brain to process everything that's going on in your life.
Yes. And let's dive into the science, but I think on this topic of modern society and constant attention, the net result of that is we are the most stimulated, least self-aware generation in recorded history. And that makes sense with everything we just talked about. So let's get into the science. We've talked about this first one on a few episodes, the part of your brain called the default mode network, the DMN. So the first thing worth understanding is that your brain actually has a reflection mode. And it's the default mode network. It's a system that activates when you're not focused on an external task. It's involved in self-referential thinking, empathy, imagining the future, making sense of your own life story. The problem is most of us never deliberately activate it. Like we talked about, we fill every gap with a podcast, like you just said, a scroll, a text. So the brain's natural processing system we already have, all of us as humans, the one designed to help you make sense of your experience, almost never gets turned on or run anymore.
Interesting.
So what intentional reflection does is give the default mode network a direction. Instead of wandering, it's processing, and that's when it actually does its job.
That's interesting. And a second concept is called affect labeling. And here's one of the most powerful findings in emotion research in the last 20 years. A researcher at UCLA named Matthew Lieberman ran a series of studies where he scanned people's brains while they're exposed to emotionally charged images. Then he had them do one thing: name what they're feeling. And when people put a word to the emotion, even just the word angry or afraid, their amygdala, which is the emotion part of the brain, it's also the brain's threat detector, it quieted down. So when they named the emotion, then they calmed down. Their prefrontal cortex, which handles reasoning, and regulation, that part of the brain lit up. So the phrase he used to describe this was say it to tame it. And we've talked about this in other episodes in terms of naming emotions and growing your own emotional intelligence. You don't process an emotion by pushing it down or thinking harder about it. You process it by naming it, actually putting a word to it. Out loud, in writing, or into a voice memo. The modality matters less than the act of putting language to what you feel. So whether it's written or spoken, but it's important that you actually put a word to it.
Yeah. And we know we've talked, like you said on previous podcasts, we've talked about emotional literacy and like building your emotional vocabulary so you can name those. But in this context, you can't practice that unless you are intentionally doing it and quieting down. So now there's science around speaking out loud. And this is where it gets interesting. It connects to James Pennebaker's work on expressive writing, a previous podcast guest that we covered in an earlier episode. When you articulate a thought or a feeling in structured language, your brain encodes it differently than if you just think about it.
Which is an interesting idea that we don't always think in words. Mm-hmm. We sometimes think in abstract thoughts. But and this is one of the things we got from Dr. Pennebaker, when you're forced to put it in words, your brain organizes the thoughts differently. So just the way just the thought that enters your mind when you see some dessert that you really crave or a person you really love, you may or may not actually say the words. You just have a feeling come. But when you're forced to actually translate that feeling into words, it forces your brain to organize the thoughts. That's where the growth is when you articulate it into language.
Well, then when you organize the thoughts, your brain knows what to do with it, right? Like if it's suppressed thoughts or emotions you're not surfacing, then your brain doesn't know, your nervous system gets triggered and your pressure's building in your pot, right? And you don't know what to do with it. So just organizing it, that's a good point. Organizing it in itself helps your brain know how to help yourself, right? So there's a phenomenon called the saying is believing effect. When you hear yourself say something out loud, you process it through an additional layer. You become both the speaker of the words and the listener, and that creates what researchers call psychological distance, a small but meaningful separation between you and the experience. And that's the distance right there. That gap is where reflection actually happens. So when you say when you said earlier, you can reflect by speaking into a voice memo or out loud to yourself in your car, this isn't a lesser version of journaling. The neuroscience actually says it might be equally powerful. And for some people, it might be significantly more natural or easier to do.
Right. For some, it's writing. For some, it's speaking. And I don't know that there's a set way. That's one of the things we also explored with Dr. Pennebaker, because we asked him, because all of his early research was on writing. And he said, no, it's not writing. It's just the process of formulating it into words. So whether it's spoken or written, depends on what your personal preference is. But just getting it into words is where the benefit is. So here's the fourth concept is the wandering mind. So in 2010, two Harvard researchers named Killingsworth and Gilbert, they published a study in Science that followed 250,000 people throughout their day using an app that randomly pinged them and asked, what are you doing? What are you thinking about? And how do you feel? The finding, people's minds were wandering 47% of the time. And they were less happy during mind wandering than during any other activity, even activities they didn't enjoy. And the conclusion from the study was a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. What that tells us about reflection is your brain isn't naturally restful when left alone. It needs direction. So an intentional reflection, even just 2 minutes of it, gives your brain a specific, productive direction rather than letting it spin on anxiety, regret, or distraction. And honestly, I'm just going to say, like, I've tried meditation. Mm-hmm. Meditation's been hard for me personally to benefit from. And And when I talk to people who really embrace meditation, they say just because I'm not doing it right. I don't know. But for me, whether that's true or not, I'm just not doing it right or not. When I think of meditation, I think I'm just like, you're trying to just empty your mind, and then your mind wanders, and then you're trying to bring it back, and your mind wanders, and you're trying to bring it back, but you're trying to bring it back to just observing. And I know there's science and benefit to it. I'm just talking honestly that it's been hard for me. But what I love about reflection, and I'm a very verbal person, and so just sitting and meditating is hard for me. But when I'm reflecting, and the way I've been doing it recently is with an app where I'm actually either speaking or writing things into complete sentences. And that, like we just read from the study, it's directed focus. And so I'm not just sitting there just like letting my mind wander about the day, either the upcoming day or the past day. I'm actually answering a specific question or formulating ideas into specific words. And so like this says, it's directing the thoughts. And maybe that's where I've struggled with meditation, is I just have a hard time in that form, directing thoughts. I just prefer doing it while speaking.
It's a good point. They're almost different things. As you said that, it almost makes me think learning reflection in this directed way, where you're just getting things out of your head, is almost like a good skill to learn before true meditation as it's defined. Because meditation, you're right, it's more about observing what's coming, right? You sit there and you're...
So meditation's like grad school, and I'm still in the high school of reflection.
Maybe, but no, not.
That's what I heard you say.
It is more so like, from what I understand of meditation, it's you're literally sitting there. That's why you like focus on your breath. And when a thought does come, you're not pushing the thought away. You're observing it. And then you're coming back to your breath. You feel the sensations of your body. It's like, it's experiencing thoughts, experiencing sensations in your body. Right. So it's almost like a level up, I guess.
Yeah.
I've had the same problems with meditation. Let's just say that. So I'm also in whatever you called high school or.
Yeah. But I mean, I guess it's just worth calling out that reflection is not meditation.
Right.
When you're reflecting, there might be a prompt, a specific question that you're asking, like, what were my wins from today? Or how do I imagine a good day looking like? Or at the end of today, what would success look like? I mean, and those are prompts, and then you formulate your response in words, and by doing so, you're reflecting. But it's not necessarily just unguided.
Yeah, good point. So we talked about how hard or how unnatural it might be for specifically the Western world and our culture to do this. So how long does it take for this to become a little more natural, to build this habit formation around reflecting and introspection?
Yeah, so the brain defaults to least resistance. So scrolling on our phones is easy because it doesn't require effort. Sitting with yourself is not always easy. And sometimes when you're procrastinating or avoiding working through tough feelings, that might be when scrolling is easier, because we're actively avoiding sitting with ourselves.
Yeah. And we talked about this on a previous podcast around habits, where, everyone thinks the 21-day habit, it takes 21 days to form a habit. The new science shows that's wrong. And we talked about Philip Allally at UCL, where that study showed that average habit formation actually takes 66 days. And there's a lot of details in that study. But one thing that I found most powerful, with Dr. Judd Brewer, who listen to our next episode, phenomenal episode on this research. But he talked about how you can you can upgrade the reward value in your brain through the OFC, the orbital frontal cortex. And this was so fascinating for me to learn, because it made me realize one, how the brain works and how you update the reward value, meaning the reward value for your brain right now might be, if you have a moment to sit still, going on your phone and scrolling. Your brain today might see that as dopamine and motivation and reward. In order to replace that bad habit with something that's boring, you have to truly experience reflection and the sensations and the benefit from it long enough and enough times. And when you do that, when you actually experience it, the science he jumps into says that literally in that part of your brain, the OFC, that upgrades the brain's reward value, and it can replace it from what would be doom scrolling in the past. So now reflection and introspection, as you see the benefits of it and feel and experience the benefits of it, now your brain, that's the easiest way for your brain to rewire. It's like, oh, this is a good thing. This is valuable.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting when we prepared to interview Dr. Brewer, Luke read his book on unwinding anxiety, and I read his book on food habit. So it's this, in both books, it's almost the same teachings and concepts, but in different contexts. So because I read it from the food content, the way I sort of internalized the idea is we update the reward value of something when we choose to value it. And you've probably seen this when you really want to eat salads and you believe that they're healthy, and then you start to like them. While you're eating them, you're getting value. And some people say it's like, it's just the placebo effect. It's just because you want to like it. And it's like, yeah, but that's okay, right? If you teach yourself, these are the foods that I want to like, and then you learn and understand these are the foods that are actually really harmful to me, then our reward value for those bad foods goes down, and the reward value for the other foods goes up. And so as it relates to daily reflection, if you buy into the idea that I'm going to improve my mental fitness, I'm going to improve my overall well-being, I'm going to improve my connection to myself and my emotional intelligence by developing the habit of doing self-reflection every day, and you're bought into that, then the reward value in your mind goes up when you do it. And I've noticed this just in the last few weeks in my own self. As we rolled this feature out in our app, we'll talk about this later, I've been consistently doing a daily reflection as part of my morning routine, a voiced morning reflection where I spend 5 to 10 minutes talking through the upcoming day and reflecting on the previous day. And because I'm doing it, I believe it's good for me and I want to do it, I get so happy when I'm done. It's like that feeling of checking the box when you finish a goal and accomplish it. And so it's been easier for me as I'm still developing it as a habit, but it's been easy because I feel the benefits of just organizing my thoughts. But then I'm also like, and I'm improving my mental fitness. I'm doing something good for myself. And so I'm feeling really good about it.
I think that's a key point you said, where it takes that initial mental commitment, because you have to give yourself enough consistency, and that bar has to be low enough to actually do it, right? If it's just 2 minutes a day, for instance, you have to be consistent enough. Again, in order to upgrade the brain's reward value, it has to be experience. You just said it. You said now you feel the benefit of it, but you've done it enough times to get to that point. So now you almost look forward to it.
Yeah, I think another key insight on this is when you're trying to develop this habit and rewire your brain is you're not fighting laziness. You're fighting a nervous system that was trained by a decade of instant feedback loops. And so that's going to take time and consistency to retrain. Mm-hmm. And so you got to be kind to yourself and not negative self-talk when it's hard to do, because you're rewiring habits that have been formed. And I mean, man, most of us have just bad scrolling habits. Most of us spend too much time on our dang phones because it's so easy to do.
Yeah.
It can take time to break that, but there's real benefit. All right, this show is all about mental fitness, and here's something most of us don't admit. Everyone has those moments when you feel overwhelmed, stuck, or unsure, and what's actually going on in your head. That's why we built New. New is a mental fitness platform designed to help you clear your thoughts, reflect, notice patterns, develop habits, and get support that fits who you are. It remembers your goals, your wins, the things you're working on, and helps you stay on track. Not therapy, not toxic positivity, just real support when you need it. Head to talkwithnew.com. That's talkwithnue.com.
So let's jump into some real world habits and how we respond to life. One of them being stress and overwhelm. We all know what those bad habits or certain things we want to do when we're stressed and overwhelmed, which is typically escape mode, right? When you go to scroll or watch TV, or you try to check out or numb yourself, which might make sense at a surface level because your nervous system is fried, but you're never actually processing things like we're talking about. That stress yesterday is still sitting in your body today. It's never getting processed. So it's more about building these new habits like we just talked about, Dave, and closing that loop instead of leaving this loop open that just never gets closed, and this pressure just builds up day over day.
I mean, there's the element of processing the feelings of stress and overwhelm, but sometimes through reflection, you can identify the root cause.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just the stress and overwhelm of the demands of life that aren't going to change, but sometimes you can recognize something that's causing it and make a change. Another area is in relationships, interpersonal relationships. There's hard conversation. You want to move on. You carry something with you that you can't name. You can't name it. You don't address it. That leaks out sideways as like irritability or distancing or silence treatment or resentment. And so as it relates to relationships, reflection gives you access. When they said that, I felt small. And that's not overthinking. That's just good information. And honestly, like taking time to reflect on our interpersonal interactions, how those the things that they did impacted us, and how the things that we did may have impacted them, and why we said and did the things that we did, maybe some things we regret. But that's also, that's so important for developing good relationships is just reflecting and being honest in our reflection. And it's not, when you're reflecting with yourself, when you're reflecting with someone, you sometimes are, if there's contention between another person, particularly with like a spouse or a partner, when you're talking to another person about it, you're trying to like get them to see your side of things. And if you're discussing it with your partner directly, now you're in conflict resolution. And those are important conversations. But what we're talking about as it relates to reflection is it's just you and your thoughts. And you be totally honest and vulnerable with yourself and being willing to see where maybe you did something wrong, or being really open about how something that they did may have hurt you or made you feel a certain way. But then it's understanding and being able to come at it almost from a neutral standpoint of like, oh, I was feeling really, and combining those two things, I was feeling really stressed and overwhelmed from work. And then when I interacted with my spouse, that leaked out. And so I was really unkind in some of the things I said. But it wasn't anything to do with her, or it was really because of how I was feeling from work. And then just being able to recognize that yourself, oh, how much easier it is then to go and apologize. And because you understand what happened.
No, that's a great point. And if you think about just relationships in general, one of the biggest faults or why a lot of relationships have struggle is lack of communication. It's talked about a lot, right? So if you first learn how to communicate with yourself and build self-awareness, because how could you fully communicate if you can't process yourself, right? So what I've seen is two more self-aware, introspective, reflective people in a relationship can communicate in a very great way. And that solves so many problems, just communication in itself. But first you have to learn how to communicate with yourself.
Yep.
So what about performance? Because, and again, I think people think, reflection or introspective or mindfulness and think softness, or they think like, oh, this soft-spoken, maybe it's just me and maybe there's stigma around this, but I think before the work we're doing now, I think it's easy to tie those words to something like mindfulness or reflection. But a lot of high performers in their domains do this. If you think about it, pilots debrief, surgeons debrief, athletes watch film. It's not optional in elite performance. It's that mechanism that converts experience into improvement. So most people, we talked about this a little bit earlier, accumulate experience and live the same experiences over and over without converting it. But the best way to actually perform and improve performance day over day is that reflection and processing.
Yeah, I think of this line from a book I read. I can't remember the book, but it said, most people say they have 20 years experience, but what they really mean is they have 1 year of experience repeated 20 times.
Yeah, exactly.
And so if you're not learning from your experience, the time you spent doing a job isn't what matters. It's how much you grew and learned in it. But as it relates to elite performance, when you were talking, I couldn't help but think about Kobe Bryant, his mentality and his ability to self-reflect was really remarkable. He came into the league. He joined the NBA at the age of 18, coming straight from high school, with incredible talent, and obviously had a huge talent, but wasn't the fastest, the highest jumper, the biggest hands, the most athletic in the league, but incredibly talented. But from where he began his career to where he ended, that's what's the most remarkable about Kobe, is how much he grew. He's considered one of the greatest of all time, and it's how much he grew, even though he had tremendous talent, that some of it he inherited from his father who played professional basketball, but how much he grew. But here's the thing that I love about Kobe. He always was self-reflecting, and he said in his mind, failure doesn't exist. It's just asking questions. Failure is when you stop trying. So, rookie season, he, and I don't know if we've covered this in another episode, but I love this story, so I've probably told it before, but they're playing the Utah Jazz, and Kobe Bryant at the end of a game airballs 5 times in a row a three-pointer. And they go into overtime, and some of them are a chance to win, and they end up losing, and getting eliminated. And everyone is mocking him, making fun of this rookie who came in with all this high potential, and he played really bad. But this was pre-social media. He didn't know that anyone was talking to him. He didn't care. All he did was try to understand why did that happen? And he just was, through self-reflection, constantly trying to figure out, why did I airball? That's really weird. And he finally came to the answer that this year before in high school, he played 30 games. Now in the NBA, there's 80 games in a season, and then there's postseason playoff games. And this is like the 100th game of the season. So he's played more than 3 times longer than he had the year before. And the reason at the end of that season that he was airballing at the end of a game was he just lacked the strength in his legs. So as soon as he came up with the answer, he went to the gym and started lifting weights. And it never happened again. And that's just a great example of someone who, through self-reflection, was able to get the most out of his experience. What I probably would have done, or what a lot of people would do, is you have a really bad performance and you're just so frustrated. You're like, I just want to forget about it. And you're just like, I'm just going to go hit the gym hard, or I'm just going to go play a game, or I'm going to just do something to get my mind off it. I'm just going to go blow off steam, and the season's over. I'm just going to forget about it. And that's the missed opportunity. And so when there's experience and there's no pause for reflection, and we go straight from experience to distraction because we don't want to reflect on the negative outcome of that experience, that's the missed growth. And I just think that story of Kobe was just so amazing. How remarkable that this 19-year-old kid was able to just look inward and reflect on that until he came up with an answer. And then the next season, he was even that much better.
That's a cool example. And I'm glad you highlighted a male there, because when you look in the, relative to reflection, when you look at gender, stigma, and who actually struggles the most, research shows women are significantly more likely to engage in emotional processing and help seeking. The male socialization actively work against reflection, the strong silent type, the solution focus over emotional processing, vulnerability framed as a weakness. That's so prevalent in today's society that the research makes sense.
Yeah, men are less likely to go to therapy. They're more likely to suppress.
Yeah.
And men die by suicide 3 to 4 times the rate of women. And so emotional suppression has a body count. But when men do engage in structural reflection, the research shows equal benefit. So some studies suggest men benefit more from prompted reflection, specifically because they're less practiced at unstructured emotional access. They're less practiced at doing it. And so when they do it, there's a more immediate benefit.
Yeah. And the prompt matters. How are you feeling? Asking yourself that lands differently and has a different response than at the end of the day, what's one thing that went well today and one thing that didn't, right? Black and white. So again, tapping into your feelings, and reflection, like I said before, has gotten packaged as soft. Journaling, therapy, meditation retreats. It carries an identity cost for a lot of people.
And like that prompt matters. It's even how are you feeling is almost harder to answer than what's one thing that went well and one thing that didn't.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's worth naming directly on that point that the people who typically dismiss this the fastest are probably the ones who need it the most.
Yeah. There's Stoic generals of the past, Japanese executives, elite athletes. None of them would call this soft, but they've embodied this. So the reframe is, this is a performance tool. It's how you process, recalibrate, and show up better tomorrow. It's how you get the most out of your experience. Yeah, let's pivot to sort of a practical framework. So 2 minutes is the minimum effective dose. That's the floor, not the ceiling. So let's take the 2 minute pause. Step 1 is name it. You put one word to what you're feeling. So, for example, anxious, proud, tired but relieved. One word activates the process. So step 1 is name it. Step 2 is say it. You speak it out loud. If you're in the car, you say it out loud, or you can voice memo. If you're in a quiet room, you can also write it if there's people around you, but you don't need anyone around you, but you got to say it out loud. And step 3 is ask one question. What do I want to carry forward? Or the question you could ask is, what do I want to leave behind? And that gives the brain the direction for the reflection. And that's the whole process. That's a simple sort of 2 minute drill, if you will.
Yeah, very simple, very actionable. So maybe tonight or, tomorrow during the day, before you go to sleep, just say one honest sentence out loud about how you're feeling, how your day went. Not how it's supposed to go, how it actually went, and how you're truly feeling in the moment. And for anyone who doesn't know what to say, just start with, right now I feel XYZ, one word. And again, consistency beats duration. It's going to take time for your brain to upgrade its reward value, but be consistent. If you miss a couple days, return. You don't need to restart. Come back and just be consistent. And over time, you can experience the benefits here.
Yeah. Let's recap and talk about some core takeaways. So here's just some things that we've talked about that I got from this. Reflection is not journaling, not meditation. It's not woo. It's any intentional pause between experience and meaning. And it can be in the form of journaling, but it's not, journaling by itself is not necessarily reflection.
And don't look around you to see this in practice, because Western culture trained us out of this. Like we talked about, other cultures still do this, never lost it, but don't be looking around for examples of this, because not a lot of people are in practice of it.
And it's not just Western culture. I think modern technology has even made it worse. I would say this can be your superpower to differentiate yourself in your line of work or whatever it is that you want to be successful at. Probably one of the most underserved areas of our mental health today is taking time for self-reflection. Because taking time for ourselves, we mask relaxing on the couch while scrolling through social media is self-care, which couldn't be further from the truth, because there's nothing positive happening in the self when we're scrolling social media. That is a total misnomer. So our society, the technology, the modern culture, all of that has made this so difficult to do that this will differentiate you. But the neuroscience is unambiguous. Naming emotions reduces their power. Speaking out loud creates psychological distance. And like the one study showed, a wandering mind is an unhappy mind.
You cannot grow from an experience you never stop to process. The pause is not wasted time. Like you said, it's where growth actually happens.
Yeah, amen. And this is exactly why daily reflection is now a core feature in the new app, the mental fitness app. It's not a journal, it's not a chat bot, it's just a structured space to pause, name it and process it, and help you reframe, understand patterns, and evolve. And we'll add a link in the show notes to where you can download the app, or you can go to talkwithnew.com. That's NUE, talkwithnue.com.
Thanks for joining this episode of the Mental Fitness Podcast. If you enjoyed this, learned something, comment on whatever platform you're listening to, share it with someone else, and we'll see you next episode.
And take time to reflect on this episode.